Welcome to episode 30 of the Resurrection Podcast. I am Acusio Bivona. In system architecture, there's a fundamental concept known as graceful degradation. And what this is when a complex machine is pushed totally past its capacity, when the network is flooded, or another way you can think of it is an engine is running in the red. It doesn't just instantly crash. What it does instead is it runs a hardwired survival protocol. It does this by intentionally shutting down its secondary, highly expensive features so that the core engine, or CPU, can survive the load. Basically, it just cuts the power to the cabin so that the turbine can keep spinning. And when you're a man building a company from the ground up, you understand this concept implicitly. If the cash flow suddenly dries up, or the market completely turns against you, you don't hesitate. You take action and you immediately cut the failing projects or the failing people in some cases. You, for example, break the lease on the office space you aren't using. And at times, and I know I went through this, you strip the business down to the absolute bare essentials just to keep the doors open and the lights on. I don't have doors open and lights on in my business, but you get the idea. But at the same time, what you may not realize is that your own body is running this exact same survival protocol on your physical hardware right now, if you're in this scenario. So today, we're going to have a brutally honest conversation about why you're actively shrinking underneath your clothes. We're going to look at the exact physical reality of graceful degradation, why your body is treating your muscle like an expensive liability, and how your chaotic, desk-bound schedule is actively dismantling the strongest version of yourself. I touched on this a little bit last week, but from this lens, I spent years operating under a massive physical delusion, and I had convinced myself it was just the unavoidable reality of being a successful coach. In my past, as I began aggressively building my fitness and nutrition business, I was managing a couple dozen clients, running my days sometimes from sunrise until long after dark. And because I had built a massive physical foundation in my early and mid-20s, I began treating my muscle mass like a permanent installation. I would catch a glimpse of myself in the mirror and assume that because I had put in the heavy work years ago, my physical infrastructure would just patiently wait for me until my schedule finally slowed down. But foolishly and naively, I was just lying to myself. And if you're relying on the ghost of your past physical glory, unfortunately, you're lying to yourself too. Because your body doesn't care about the heavy weight you used to lift 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 20 years ago. It doesn't care about your high school or college records. It only responds to the physical demands of today. And physically speaking, muscle tissue is really active and very expensive to keep building. It requires a massive and consistent amount of fuel, oxygen, and hydration, and it requires a constant heavy physical demand just to justify its existence on your frame. And when you stop putting that heavy, undeniable tension on your body, your system stops seeing your muscle as an asset. It looks at the broad chest and thick arms the exact same way you look at an employee who hasn't produced a single result in 6 months, but is still collecting a massive weekly paycheck. It's a massive drain on your limited resources that's producing really zero return. It's become a direct threat to your daily survival. And your biological engine is perfectly designed to ruthlessly strip away anything that isn't pulling its weight. So looking at the exact physical reality of what happens when you sit behind a desk for 12 hours a day, you're fighting the friction of your business while doing this. And you're burning massive amounts of mental energy dealing with the total chaos of your daily work. You're negotiating heavy contracts, you're putting out fires with vendors, and you're running on black coffee and sheer willpower sometimes. You're consistently skipping meals because you're simply too busy to stop. Or at least that's what we tell ourselves. Your body begins to register this extreme mental stress, and it is actively registering the lack of food. And in a sense, it assumes that you're in a famine, and it assumes that you're fighting a war. But at the exact same time, it registers total physical comfort because you're sitting completely motionless in a padded ergonomic chair, and there's zero heavy demand being placed on your skeleton. You are totally dormant. This creates a scenario where your body starts the graceful degradation process. Your system begins to recognize that it's in a high-stress, low-fuel environment, but it also knows that you don't need physical strength to survive this specific threat. You just need cheap energy to keep your brain firing. So it looks at the dormant hardware you built years ago, and it makes a ruthless, highly efficient biological decision. It begins to actively dismantle you. And it does this by breaking down your unused muscle tissue and converting it into cheap energy. When you're in this state, you're literally eating your own physical power just to survive the chaos of your inbox. And this is exactly why you may be looking in the mirror and wondering why your shoulders are rolling forward, why your posture is starting to collapse, and why you feel incredibly fragile when you simply try to move a heavy piece of furniture or carry a luggage up a flight of stairs. You haven't just lost a step. Your body is actively sabotaging you and your physical armor to protect you, quote unquote, protect you from the crushing weight of your own poorly managed schedule. And this is where the massive physical failure actually begins. When the man steering his own operation finally catches his reflection in the mirror and admits that he's getting physically soft, his first instinct is almost always to try and starve the problem away. He assumes the issue is simply that he's carrying too much mass, so he decides to just stop eating. He may be skipping breakfast and convincing himself that he's just being highly efficient. He works totally through lunch, maybe grabbing a handful of almonds or drinking a quick shake while staring at his phone, and then he eats a tiny, restrictive dinner. And he assumes that if he just stays hungry long enough, he'll shrink his way back to strength. And although it's flawed, logically we can see how this thought process can occur. But physically, what you're really doing is throwing total gasoline on the graceful degradation fire. Think about this like a literal survival situation. If you're stranded in the freezing cold and running out of supplies, you're not going to burn your most valuable life-saving equipment just to stay warm for one night. What you're going to do is burn the trash. You're going to burn the dead wood. So when you aggressively starve your body while sitting in a dormant, high-stress environment, you're doing the exact opposite. Your body is receiving two distinct signals: the massive psychological stress and severe food restriction. And it's seeing the sudden drop in calories as a life-threatening famine. Stored fat is your body's ultimate emergency survival reserve. If we're getting really, really primal here, that's ultimately its greatest purpose. It's incredibly cheap to store and highly efficient. It's incredibly cheap to store and highly efficient to keep alive. Fuck that one up. So your body fiercely protects the soft weight around your waist, especially because that's where a lot of your organs are, to keep you from starving. So instead, it targets your expensive, fuel-hungry muscle tissue even harder. So by starving yourself without applying heavy physical demand, you're literally burning your most powerful hardware and desperately protecting the trash. You're teaching your biological engine to become incredibly efficient at holding on to fat and incredibly efficient at destroying the strongest version of yourself. And I remember the exact moment I realized this starvation strategy was completely destroying me. During the busiest years of running my coaching practice, I was surviving entirely on stress and black coffee a lot of the time. I was eating maybe one real meal a day. And I remember I finally stepped onto the scale and I saw that the number had dropped by 10 pounds. And for a split second, my ego spiked, right? I actually convinced myself, the coach, that I was leaning out, beating the system and winning. But then I took a glance in the mirror without a shirt on. My chest was really flat. My shoulders had seemed like they'd gotten noticeably smaller and were starting to roll forward. My arms looked smaller. But the biggest thing for me was the soft weight around, I call them lojitas, like your love handles. That was the physical result of the stress. Was exactly the same, if not a little bit bigger. One thing I want to make really clear is that the scale is a gigantic, unforgiving liar sometimes, because it's only measuring the total mass of the object pulling against gravity once you stand on it. It's not telling you the actual structural condition of your body. It doesn't tell you what you're losing. You step on the scale and celebrate a lower number. Hooray. But we're also entirely blind to the fact that you've just burned away another 5 pounds of dense, powerful muscle. Yes, you are successfully shrinking, I guess, but you're not getting leaner. In fact, a lot of times your body fat percentage can go up because the body fat amount is increasing or staying the same, but your lean body mass, which is your muscle, is going down. So in that sense, you're becoming a smaller, weaker, and more fragile man. And the physical consequences are very real. You're left with a frame that can't handle basic physical demand. Your knees and shoulders start to ache constantly because the heavy muscle they used to support and protect those joints is totally gone. The joints are now taking all the stress and the friction. The common one, I've dealt with it, your lower back, right? Constantly tightens up and maybe it spasms because the structural columns of your core have been dismantled for cheap energy. You successfully starved away your physical armor, and you're leaving the weakest version of yourself completely exposed to the daily physical stress of your life. And when a man building his own legacy finally realizes, if he realizes, that he's physically shrinking, he often tries to fix the problem by simply moving more, which is noble and good in a lot of ways. Maybe he buys an expensive stationary bike for his garage, or he goes for a long, light jog around his neighborhood, or he does 30 minutes of light, repetitive sweating work or whatever in his living room. This creates a false assumption that just by breaking a sweat, getting his heart rate up and feeling out of breath, that it's enough to stop the physical decay. And he's equating feeling exhausted with getting stronger. But those don't correlate at all. In fact, in that instance, you may actually be sending the wrong signal. Because when you do light repetitive movement for an extended period of time, you're telling your physical engine that you need to move a long distance very efficiently. And what is the most efficient way to make a vehicle travel further on limited fuel? Let me say that again. What is the absolute most efficient way to make a vehicle travel further on limited fuel? You strip out all the heavy weight and make it lighter. And in this instance, as I've been saying, you're stripping out the heavy, energy-hungry muscle. So by running on that pavement while you're already under high stress, you're actually telling your body to accelerate the degradation. You are begging it to drop the muscle so you can become a literally lighter, yes, but also weaker endurance machine. And you may be thinking, well, Kuz, that doesn't sound like a terrible idea. The fact of the matter is, graceful degradation doesn't stop just because you break a sweat. It doesn't stop because you feel tired. It only stops when your body is faced with a massive, undeniable physical threat that it just can't survive without actual strength. And that's the problem with the lighter endurance machine. The way that we fix this is by placing heavy load on your frame that physically demands the muscle to stay. And that's what strength training does. When you step onto or under a heavy bar, your physical system instantly receives a new direction. Because gravity doesn't care about your heart rate. Your nervous system realizes that if it continues to dismantle your physical infrastructure, it will literally be crushed into the floor. And it suddenly recognizes that your dormant muscle is no longer an expensive liability. It realizes that it's an absolute non-negotiable requirement for your immediate physical survival. So by committing to strength training, you're forcing the physical decay to stop. Not by starving yourself, and not by running miles and miles around your neighborhood, but by forcefully demanding strength and power. But demanding that strength from the bar is only half the equation. You can't rebuild a failing foundation if you're still aggressively starving the worksite. Once you introduce that heavy physical demand, which, as I'm saying, is a literal requirement for men like us, you have to fundamentally change the way you view your food too. You're no longer eating to shrink, and you're no longer eating because it's an obligation or annoying. You're eating to rebuild the machine. You can't punish yourself for the soft weight around your waist by skipping meals or surviving on a handful of almonds, like I mentioned earlier. You can't afford to run your daily life on fumes. We have to strip away the starvation tactics. And we have to stop treating our body like a cheap vehicle that we refuse to put premium gas in. You start feeding your body dense, heavy fuel. You give it the exact raw materials it needs to repair the daily wear and tear, reinforce the aching joints, and build back the dormant hardware you allowed to slip away while you were sitting totally paralyzed behind a screen. Think about the reality of a Thursday afternoon when the system is finally running correctly. Think about how you feel right now. You hit 3 o'clock and you're completely wiped out. You're relying on the 4th cup of coffee or a cheap energy drink just to keep your eyes open during a critical client call. You're probably irritable. Your focus is probably totally fractured, and your body is desperately eating its own tissue for cheap energy just to keep you to 5 o'clock. But now let's look at the man who actually properly feeds the machine. The infrastructure is heavily and correctly fueled. You're not crashing. You don't need the artificial spike of caffeine because you have actual dense calories driving the engine. Your mind is sharper. Your engine is running louder, grounded, and fully awake. You stop apologizing for eating real food. And you stop trying to starve yourself into a smaller, weaker frame. You combine the undeniable physical demand of the heavy iron with the massive, dense fuel required to sustain it. By doing this, you are stopping the physical decay in its fucking tracks, and you force your body to construct the strongest version of yourself yet. So what happens? What does the physical shift look like when you finally stop the decay? Well, when you stop running your daily life on fumes, you stop starving yourself, and you step back under the bar. Your biology is going to completely change its primary direction. Your body will stop viewing your muscle as a massive burden and start treating it as an absolute non-negotiable requirement to stay alive. It takes the heavy, dense fuel that you're finally feeding it and immediately goes to work on rebuilding the frame. You physically start to take up space again. Your shoulders pull back and widen. Your posture naturally corrects itself because your spine and your skeleton are finally supported by dense, powerful muscle. The heavy physical armor you allowed to slip away while sitting motionless behind that desk is actively beginning to return. And you are no longer hollow on the inside. This complete physical shift heavily bleeds into the way you handle the daily stress of your work, too. Now, I remember I experienced this exact shift when I finally stopped starving myself and rebuilt my own foundation. When you're heavily fueled and physically powerful, you don't just break under a bad day. You stop operating from a place of absolute physical fragility, and when a client gets angry, or when a massive project falls through, or when the market turns, it doesn't send you into a heavy physical panic. Your engine is no longer running in the red, so your mind doesn't immediately jump to an emergency or survival state. You now possess a deep, quiet, physical confidence that totally overrides the anxiety. You carry a physical presence into the room that people immediately feel and respect because you look like a man who can handle a heavy load. And you stop just surviving your schedule. You finally possess the massive physical infrastructure that is required to actually carry the weight of the life you have built without it crushing the strongest version of yourself. I want you to take a look at the reality of your situation. You're a highly capable man. Your business success demonstrates that. You know how to build a business from nothing. You know how to navigate absolute chaos, and you know how to survive. You have built a massive successful machine around yourself. But survival is a gigantic physical compromise. You're surviving the daily... I cannot talk today. I apologize for all the stuttering and stuff. Let's try that again. You are surviving the daily chaos of your work, but at the same time, you are actively eating your own physical power to do it. You're trading your physical strength, your bone density, and your posture for a bigger bank account. And that seems dope until it isn't. You're stacking the cash, but you're leaving yourself completely exposed to gravity, to injury, and to a massive physical decline, especially later down the road. Don't accept the dormant, fragile version of yourself as the permanent cost of your success. Stop starving your body, stop running miles around your neighborhood, and stop hoping you can somehow shrink your way back to strength. You can't outwork a crashing system. And you can't build a lasting, powerful legacy if your hardware is actively failing underneath your clothes. So if you're a man running his own operation, and you're ready to stop the physical decay, if you're ready to stop the graceful degradation and use heavy iron and dense fuel to rebuild your failing hardware, now is the time to make the move. Go to the website into the description and download my system diagnostic. It's free. And from there, you can file your Intel report to coach with me or have me coach you. I will be the man in your corner. We will locate exactly where your schedule is actively dismantling you, and we will strip away the starvation tactics, install the strict, heavy, non-negotiable standards of the resurrection protocol so that we can forge your comeback from the ground up. The time for guessing is over. Let's start rebuilding. Tune the engine, rebuild the machine, resurrect the man. I am Acusio Bivona, and I will see you in the work.